Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program for Monday, May 16th. If you're here for Sharing Our Desert's LGBTQ plus history, you're in the right place. We will be getting started in just a moment or so. We're going to give folks a little time to come in from the waiting room. So sit back, relax, and be patient. We'll be starting in just a moment. Welcome again. If you're here for the Book Club of California's live online program for Monday, May 16th, titled Sharing Our Desert's LGBTQ plus history, you're in the right place. We are going to be starting in just a moment or so. It's just a minute or two past the top of the hour. So sit back, relax, and we will be starting shortly. Thanks. All right, it's about 4 minutes past the top of the hour, so we're going to get started here. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online program titled Sharing Our Desert's LGBTQ plus history, how it all began. This is a live online presentation by David Gray. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight and host this webinar. Tonight, we have more than 60 people registered for this presentation. So for those of you who might be new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs, like the one this evening, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the Book Club of California. Now, tonight's talk is a co-presentation with Rare Books Palm Springs. The book club is a proud cultural partner for this new and exciting antiquarian book fair. Rare Books Palm Springs opens this Friday, May 20th, from 6 to 8 p.m. with a fundraiser cocktail reception. The proceeds from the $25 ticket go to various charities, including the Book Club of California. The book fair is being held on Saturday, May 21st from 10 to 6 p.m. with free admission when you order a ticket on Eventbrite. So you can get a link to the tickets, a list of the exhibitors, and more information at rarebooksla.com. That's RAREBOOKSLA.com. Okay, and now for tonight's program and our presenter. Program's titled Sharing Our Desert's LGBTQ plus history, how it all began. It is a live online presentation by David Gray. David Gray is the co-founder and co-chair of the LGBTQ plus History and Archives of the Desert. Begun in 2019, the LGBTQ plus History and Archives of the Desert is dedicated to collecting, preserving, and making accessible the LGBTQ plus history of the greater Palm Springs area. Now tonight, David Gray will provide an overview of how and why the archives began, what their current collection houses, their exhibitions, and their future plans. So if you have any questions for our presenter, please use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those from the Q&A and the chat. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce David Gray, again, the co-founder and co-chair of the LGBTQ+ History and Archives of the Desert. David, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone. Next slide. So as Kevin pointed out, we are a brand new organization. We began in 2019 and took a little hiatus because of something called COVID. But we began to think about collecting and preserving the history of the LGBTQ+ folks and events that happened here in the Greater Palm Springs area. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Greater Palm Springs area, we are located about 90 miles from Los Angeles and about a couple of hours from San Diego. We're in a valley called the Coachella Valley, and we are made up of about 9 to 10 cities and towns, the most famous, of course, being Palm Springs. However, the history of what happened here to make Palm Springs kind of the welcoming LGBT community it is today happened in other cities and towns besides Palm Springs. And so some of those are also what we want to do within our exhibition. Somehow we lost our slide there. I want to go back. So in order to, did you want me to? Kevin, you want to go back to that other slide?
Yeah, hold on. Let me see what happened here.
Okay.
I think I lost it on my screen too.
Okay, there we go.
Seeing it?
So I'm not going to go through all the various individuals that helped make up the organization, but you can see that we've tried to have a broad spectrum of individuals, from myself, the Palm Springs Public Library, the Palm Springs Historical Society, authors, as well as some people who just had an interest. And we tried to have various important organizations be part of the organization. Next slide. So Kevin mentioned this already, but basically our mission as we saw it when we began was to collect, preserve, and make accessible the LGBTQ+ history of the Greater Palm Springs area and the Coachella Valley. The reason for a lot of this is that we were realizing that many people who had moved here, who had helped make the history possible, or events that had happened, weren't very well known, or that they were passing on, and we felt that much of that might be lost. We also were concerned that some of our history might actually leave the valley and go to other places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, etc. And we felt that researchers come to Palm Springs often trying to find information, and it wasn't very available. The Historical Society has a large collection of the history of Palm Springs, but as many historical societies that began in the 40s and 50s, they basically kind of collected what we today would say would have been the white colonial history of Palm Springs, and not include the African American, the Native American, or the Hispanic populations that also make up Palm Springs, as well as the gay and lesbian population. And so we began to think that this would be our mission to try to help bring that forward. Next. So we looked at, our vision was to kind of focus on documenting and preserving the history of the area, and then sharing that history with individuals, organizations, allies, and the public. We felt that once we began to do that, people would be interested to see what had happened. Much of even recent history kind of gets lost very quickly. And as you can imagine, Palm Springs being almost quite a community that is a tourist town, we get lots of people who come here, fall in love with the place, and within 2 or 3 years decide to move here, but they don't really know much about what was here beforehand. Next slide. So our inaugural event actually took place last fall during Pride. Now, originally Pride has been celebrated in most of the country in the month of June. And when Pride began here in Palm Springs, it also was celebrated in June. But June typically is not during the tourist season, and is also a very, very hot month. And so Palm Springs Pride eventually has moved to the first weekend of November. And so that's when we mounted our exhibition. And we entitled it Sharing Our Desert's LGBTQ plus History. And it was based on a chronological history of events, organizations, individuals that have helped make the greater Palm Springs area the welcoming place that it is for LGBTQ individuals today. We did this originally based on a timeline that we have set up that is open to researchers, but not the general public, of various events that we have been able to document, as well as individuals that took place over the past 75 years. Next event. Next slide, sorry. This kind of gives you an overview of what the exhibition looked like. We started with pre-1970 history, and then went with each of the decades following that. And we just picked out 2 or 3 or 4, 4 or 5 various things that were of import. In addition to that, we showed some memorabilia, newspapers, publications that have been published here over the years, as well as perhaps tourist brochures from various inns, and things like that. Next slide. So this kind of give you a little preview of, highlights of what it looked like. So if you want to go to the next slide. So each of the decades had various kinds of things, and so there were things like what you would see here. So the 30s, 40s, and 50s talked a little bit about the celebrity parts of what made Palm Springs kind of become the gay and lesbian place that we see today. But in those days, many of those celebrities didn't really do anything to engender what we would consider gay businesses or gay restaurants or bars or even activities of protests or things like that. They came to kind of live a more gay life here in Palm Springs that was more hidden. So they entertained privately, but didn't actually do a lot socially. However, we did find a lot of things that were interesting. In 1976, Christine Jorgensen, the first American woman to publicly announce her gender reassignment surgery, spoke at the Palm Springs Women's Club luncheon. Palm Desert is considered to be, certainly in those days, very conservative, very Republican, very not open to gay people very much at all. But Christine Jorgensen had become a celebrity, and fit well in with these ladies who lunched, basically. And they actually had it sold some of the tickets, so they had to go to a larger venue, which is in La Quinta, but now no longer there. And as I mentioned, the first gay pride began here in 1986. It was a show rather than a march or a parade or something like that. And we also had a mayor who proclaimed the first Pride Day in Quito City, which is adjoining Palm Springs, where many of the gay bars were at that time, as the first Pride Day in the area. Next slide. So this kind of gives you a bit more current things that we talked about. Bars that opened in Palm Springs, things that happened at Desert Regional Medical Center, where there was an AIDS ward, the LGBT Veterans Memorial, which is the first gay veterans memorial in the country, was dedicated once again in Cadiz City. The L Fund began in 2012 to begin helping lesbians in crisis, and they've gone on to do lots of other things. And then other cities in the area, Desert Hot Springs and the Coachella Pride also happened. So as things have become, gay people have moved from Cadiz City or to Palm Springs and other cities, they are also wanting to do things on their own for their own area. So we've tried to document some of that. Next. One of the things that we did find that most people don't even know, but 20 years ago, a time capsule was put on Arenas Road, which is kind of the area where the gay bars are in Palm Springs. And so this is just a short clip of a video from 2001 when they were going to bury the time capsule.
To whom it may concern, in August of 2001, while working at Street Bar and watching the street being torn up, I thought what a wonderful opportunity to place a time capsule somewhere in the street to show what everyday life on Arenas Road in 2001 was like. I began collecting items from all businesses on this one block. The intent of this box was to show that life is good in Palm Springs in 2001. It was never meant to be a Palm Springs, California, US or world time capsule, strictly for Arenas Road businesses and the people who use it. The time capsule was never intended to be political. However, in the course of collecting, the unthinkable tragedies of September 11th changed all Americans and the world and Arenas Road. In the box are newspapers, including our morning edition of the Desert Sun, September 11th, which didn't cover anything regarding the terrorist acts. I think this was important because it was our last day of a way of life that will probably never be the same. I hope at the time that this box is open, that the decisions made today were correct and that the world once again is wonderful. Sincerely, Paul Danos, bartender, Street Bar.
So as you can see, that was something that happened 20 years ago when we did our exhibition last year. And most of the time, it was something that I discovered along with other people. And the time capsule actually is right there in the middle of the street. It has a lovely box on it and everything. But most of the time we would ask people, have you ever heard about the time capsule on Arenas Road? No one's ever heard of it. So within 20 years, people have totally forgotten. And so although it's intended to be opened in 80 years from now, 79 now, I guess, it was, we were able to find the original video that had been taken and transfer it. And so that we have that kind of information as well. So our next steps are basically going to be to build a website where we'll be able to have a place where people will be able to find what we have in our collection, look at some of those things from the collection. And we, of course, continue to collect artifacts, secure storage space. Currently, all of the materials are in the archival room of the Palm Springs Public Library. And we are working on going from a committee to a board of directors and operating policies. Gobi.
We have some canine technical difficulties. We'll be right
All
back.
right, sorry about that. And then eventually incorporate as a 501c3. We currently operate under Greater Palm Springs Pride as an operating committee of theirs, and that's how we are able to collect funds and people are able to use them as tax write-offs. The unusual thing, I suppose, with our organization is that we didn't really start with things. Many times, various archival projects are given things and then they sort of figure out, oh dear, I guess we need to do something. We started out with basically nothing. What we did was we basically made this timeline, which I referred to, which is a Google document online, and put in things and then researched to find documentation to back those up. But as we have begun to announce who we are and to collect things, we have been given various things that we are now beginning to build a collection. And in this particular year, since our exhibition last fall, we've been given a complete set of a magazine that was published here for about 8 years, every issue of that. So we will be able to scan all of those issues and put them online. We were able to get about 100 and some odd issues of another newspaper that was also published here in the early 1990s through 2005. And of course, we'd love to get more copies of that publication if they're around, but that is kind of where we're beginning, as well as people giving us mementos and other kinds of things. Okay, next slide. We have some future projects online that we are trying to work on. Some of you may know that in Palm Springs, we have a Walk of Stars. It is downtown. It's kind of like the Hollywood Walk of Stars. It currently has about 450 different individuals and organizations on the sidewalks of the main streets of downtown Palm Springs. About 10% of those individuals are LGBT, and none of them are identified that way. And so we have just met with the city as well as the Chamber of Commerce, who manages the program. And we will be working to set up a new online category that will go onto the app, which will identify individuals who are LGBTQ, and a little bit about their various work or why they're recognized as part of our community. And that will also then sort of help, if LGBTQ tourists come and do a walk, they would be able to take the app and then find the gay and lesbian people on the Walk of Stars. We're also doing some specialized exhibits. We're going to do one in June, as well as a panel discussion, kind of commemorating the typical time when Pride is celebrated in the rest of the country. And that exhibition will be held at the Palm Springs Cultural Center, where it's going to show some blown up newspaper clippings from the past decades. And we will have a panel discussion with some journalists who either ran or were journalists, writers for various publications about LGBTQ media and the need for specialized publications if there are, and so forth and so on. And one of the panelists is a retired entertainment reporter for the local paper. He began when he was in his 20s and wrote for the paper for over 40 years, and did some early stories on being gay and coming to Palm Springs and so forth and so on. And so it'll be very interesting to hear some of what he has to say, as well as we want to digitize as much as we can of the various publications that we have, as well as some photo collections. Next slide. Well, obviously, we always want people to get involved by volunteering, donating, and helping spread the word. I realize that this audience doesn't live locally, but we do find that there are people who don't live locally who may have things that they wish to get rid of if they're in their garages or attics or basements, of things that might pertain to the greater Palm Springs area that are LGBTQ that we could keep in our collection for safekeeping. Next. Okay, and this is how you can get in touch with us. Currently, we don't have a website, as I said. We hope to have that up by this summer. But we do have an email, phone, and a Facebook page where we have been keeping people up to date with what we are doing. And with that, I think that pretty much covers how we began, what we're trying to do, and where we hope to go in the next few months and years.
Now, David, I'm back, and that was great. I'm going to leave this slide up for a couple of minutes before I pull our faces big on the screen so we can have a little bit of a conversation. But if anybody's interested in writing that down to contact you, I think following you or finding you on Facebook is a great way to go there. And that's the last data point there on your screen. So please try to do that to stay in touch with what is happening at the LGBTQ plus History and Archives of the Desert. Now is also a great time to use the chat and the Q&A function. If you have a question that you want to ask, please use those two outlets there, and we will get some of the questions from there. I'll give you a moment or so to do that. I want to start with a couple of questions that I have and some things that you touched on that I'm going to just ask a little bit more about, because I'm very interested in the timeline, and I don't want you to show us your timeline and your Google Docs, but I think it's so interesting that you're building this timeline. Who's actually contributing to the timeline, and how are people coming up with some of the data points on there, and who's being tasked with kind of researching some of those items?
So the timeline is basically open to anybody who's on the board. It began with a woman who was one of our co-founders, who was an archivist with the Palm Springs Historical Society. When we kind of began to think about how we could begin to do this program, she said, this is probably the best way to do it. And just kind of like looking, so she started by kind of doing a basic Google search through local newspapers that are part of the California newspaper collection. And so by doing that, she was able to begin to find some things. And we also knew that there had been things that had happened over the years. And so we had a vague idea of like, okay, the March on Washington in 1973, I believe, or 4, somewhere in there. Maybe it was 79. I'm not actually sure when the march was. But anyway, we know that there was people that went from here to the March on Washington. So, somebody said, okay, well, let me look and see if I can find out anything about anybody who might have gone. And lo and behold, we were able to locate actually a very funny, well, we found stories, and so we knew some of the people who did that. But one of the things we found was a photograph that's actually in Wikipedia that was taken by an AP reporter, because the Bay Area reporter criticized Dianne Feinstein for not going. And she had just been elected. And she actually was obviously annoyed because she actually did go. And so she wrote back to the Bay Area reporter and said, no, I was there, and here's a photograph to prove it. And where there was a photo of her marching with a banner and an unidentified gentleman. And it turns out the unidentified gentleman was Greg Pettis. And we all recognized him, those of us who have lived here a long time. And he eventually turned out to be the first gay mayor elected here in the Valley. He's now dead, but he was unidentified because the reporter didn't ask when he took the picture who the guy was. So we were able to find things like that. So, so by doing that now it's, we obviously knew that he sort of organized the trip, but now we actually have a photographic proof that he was actually there. So that's kind of how that began. And we allow any board member to add to the timeline. Anybody who adds to the timeline, there's a column that says who put the information there, where did they get the information, what are they using as their resource, what is their primary source, etc. And so that's kind of really how we have been able to build what's happened here over the years.
So it's all powered by volunteers. It's the board putting items on here, and then who's tasked or picking up the research to kind of vet it and get more detail behind it? Other volunteers, or is it mostly still the board?
It's still just pretty much the board. I mean, most of what it is so for instance, let's say the very first Pride that happened here, nobody really had any particular stuff, but we know that that was announced in the local paper. It wasn't the gay paper, but the local paper announced that there was going to be a Pride celebration. So we have that information. And then one other person contacted the San Francisco archives and the one archives in Los Angeles and a few other places, and sort of said, you wouldn't happen to have anything about Palm Springs in your collection. And if you do, would you happen to have any information about this event that happened on such and such a day? And it turned out that the only place that we know of that original poster exists from the first Pride celebration here in Palm Springs is at the One Archive. So they, of course, digitized that, gave it to us, and let us put it up, and we were able to reproduce the original poster from the first Pride that was 40 years ago in Palm Springs. So that's basically how you're able to do things. We know who some of the entertainers were. Because a lot of that would have been printed in the local paper. It's just a matter of going through year by year, month by month to see what was put down. And the same thing happened with bars. A gentleman allowed us to borrow his matchbook collection, where bars passed out matchbook cover matchbooks, and often, of course, had their address and phone number. Bars moved over the years, so people would say, well, I remember where the Rocks bar was, and they would be right, but they would only be right for a certain period of time, because that bar moved 4 different places over the period of time, and now, of course, it's no longer there. So that's kind of how you begin to document things. And we, for the exhibition, we took those various matchbook covers, and we had a graphic design person make a map and pinpoint where they had been, because probably about 90% of those bars, the actual buildings and sites are gone. There's something else totally there, or it's a vacant lot, or it's just there's nothing there anymore.
I'm going to stop the share so we can see each other's faces a little larger here. There we go. There's a great question in the Q&A, because you mentioned San Francisco a couple times with the Bay Area Reporter. And the question is, was Harvey Milk influential in the political history of Palm Springs at all?
To my knowledge, no.
Yeah.
He is important now, but he was not. I don't know if anyone has ever documented whether he came to Palm Springs. My sense is that he probably did, but no, he didn't actually live or have a presence here. There is such a thing called the Harvey Milk Diversity Breakfast. Actually began 10 years ago through Greater Palm Springs Pride. There's also one in San Diego. And this is just, we use it now to raise funds for the Gay Student Straight Alliance programs here in the Valley. And we just actually had it this past week. And so this would be 10 years ago that we began it. But it's now grown to be the largest Harvey Milk celebration in the country. There were over 1,500 people at the breakfast. And that included over 350 students from various high schools. And actually the Pride Parade in Palm Springs has the largest contingents of kids who actually march in the Pride Parade. So Harvey Milk is a presence now, but only in that sense.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you're currently soliciting items and donations?
Yeah, well, we of course have begun to build a list, a mailing list, and every time we get something, we advertise that as much as we can, either through Facebook, news releases, the local gay media, the straight media, and there are a lot of individuals, both gay and straight, who are very interested in the history of Palm Springs. We are very new communities. We are not very old. The Native Americans have lived here for centuries, but the white individuals basically didn't come here until just before the turn of the last century. And Palm Springs itself wasn't incorporated until 1938. So we're a pretty new community. But because of the movie star things and because of mid-century architecture, which is very popular and important here, and because of it's a very funny place, because it's a very small city of only about 45,000 people, and yet we have a world-class art museum, and we have International Film Festival, and we have all these things, and lots of philanthropy, lots of money of individuals. One of the concerns I had was, would we be able to raise enough money to even put up an exhibition, because we didn't really get back to starting until after COVID sort of quieted down last summer. And and one of my co-chairs didn't come back to work until July. So in July, we sort of said, can we do this, you know, and could we get the money? It turned out that the money wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. So we raised about $10,000 almost overnight. And we probably can continue to raise money. It's just that we need to step back and get ourselves a little bit more organized and figure out where we're going to go with the project and what we want to use that money for, not just raise money to raise money.
Mhm.
So the Walk of Stars project is this next one that is pretty doable and probably pretty important, because it not only helps flesh out the history of Palm Springs and why these people have a star on the Walk of Stars, but it also then helps inform others that they were part of the LGBTQ community, and perhaps that's why they're actually on the Walk of Stars, even though that's kind of not really acknowledged at the moment.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the partners? I know you mentioned that you're kind of the auspices of Palm Springs Pride right now, but you're working with the Historical Society, the Palm Springs Library. I mean, you got a lot of partners there, which is great.
Well, from the very beginning, it seemed that it was important that we have partners, because we knew we were going to start collecting things, and then, you know, I didn't want to put them in my garage. They needed to go someplace as where they could be kept for future generations and kept in climate-controlled environments. So the Historical Society is actually, I served on the Board of Trustees with the Palm Springs Public Library for over 10 years. And while one of the things that we did during that period of time was to restore the original downtown Palm Springs Public Library, which has a very unusual history in that in order for the city of Palm Springs to become incorporated, a gentleman had decided to donate land and help build a library for the city. Prior to 1938, there were little libraries all over the place, but not really a real library. And in order to do that, under the state of California laws regarding public libraries, it would have to be regulated by a city. And so there wasn't a city. And so they had an election whereby the city incorporated itself and accepted this gift at the same time. So this building was built in the 40s, lovely building. It's downtown, it's the oldest civic building in the city. But from about 1990 through now, about 10 years ago, it was basically vacant. It was not being used. It had been deeded to be as a library. And so what we tried to figure out what to do with that as the Board of Trustees. And what we came up with was that we would dedicate one wing to the Historical Society, because they needed a research library. They were in just a little building too. And they needed a place for archival storage. So we built archival storage in the building, and we rent to the Historical Society at $1 a year, offices and spaces and so forth. So they have, you know, brand new, basically lovely spaces. And so after they had cataloged all their stuff, and they had this woman who was working there, she said, boy, we don't really have anything on the gay and lesbian people who've lived here in Palm Springs. This is kind of crazy, you know? And so that's kind of how they got involved. And so they will take things like things that are not books or magazines or that kind of thing. So papers, photographs, paintings, T-shirts, ephemera of some sort, but not actual magazines, newspapers, or books. The library would take the magazines, newspapers, and books, because that's kind of what a library wanted to do.
Right.
And so it became kind of obvious that these would be our two major partners. And then Greater Palm Springs Pride was interested in sort of doing something. And they had actually built a timeline on their own organization, as well as the other organizations in town. And so they were interested in trying to merge these timelines. Did this happen at the same time that that happened? And nobody seemed to know. So that's kind of how the timeline began too, is that we took these other organizations and tried to merge what they had about themselves, or if they didn't have about themselves. So those are our three major partners currently. We've had discussions with the Cathedral City Historical Society. Those have just been discussions.
To be determined what happens
Well, yes, and they are very, very, very volunteer-y, and they're they are not as established. I mean, Cathedral City's only 40 years old, and they're just kind of getting off the ground. I think the other thing that we are interested in doing is the Agua Caliente Kuya tribe of Agua Caliente tribe of Kuya Band of Indians, which is our tribe here, and we are on reservation land in Palm Springs, is building their own cultural museum, which is slated to open this year. It had been put off because of COVID, as well as a huge spa right downtown. And that museum is a subset or cooperative with the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. So they will be presenting things of cultural interest in the Palm Springs area, but basically around the Native American experience. And two-spirited things have been very historically present in some tribes. However, we have not, nor have they found anything really in their tribe that acknowledges anything kind of like that, not like the Navajos and some of the others that do. But they are also interested in sort of cooperating with us in any way that they can.
I was wondering if you can tell us some of, well, I don't think you specifically mentioned it, but I think you told me the PFLAG story and the stuff that you're partnering with. You had a donation, I guess, to the archive that was about PFLAG.
So yes, like I said, we keep getting donations, and we are currently talking with 3 or 4 other people, one of whom has a collection of posters we're very interested in. But PFLAG, there was a couple that heard about this, and they were the newsletter editors for the local chapter of PFLAG, which is celebrating about, I think it's been here 40 years. Anyway, they were the newsletter editors for over 20 years, and they had kept a copy of every newsletter, as well as a large scrapbook that they kept of all kinds of stuff, newspaper articles, other kinds of things that pertain to not just PFLAG, but things that would be of interest to PFLAG members. And they basically, their daughter, who is a lesbian, lives in Montana, and so they're kind of moving to Montana, and they kind of just said, well, you know, we didn't know what to do with this, and we heard about you, and we're so excited that we can give this to you. Because, you know, once again, although it's a newsletter of PFLAG, just because it was a newsletter of PFLAG didn't, you know, they mentioned things in their newsletter that would be happening or did happen, you know, 30 years ago, that we now have more documentation on that we probably wouldn't know anything about. So yes, that things like that. And then sometimes you just sort of ask someone, we have a lot of people who are on that mailing list who are sort of amateur historians, I guess you might say. And there was a gentleman that's well known here in Palm Springs, who was who was who moved here in 1906, and he was kind of he was kind of known as the nature boy. He was a nudist, and he'd moved here from Germany, and he was a hippie, and he lived out in the canyons and blah 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 blah. And I'd always thought, well, I wonder if he was gay. He never got married, and he met with Rudy Valentino, and he did all these kind of odd little things. And so we asked someone to see if they could find out something, and they, said, oh, well, I found that there's this book in the library about him. It's not really a book. It's some master's thesis that some guy printed in 1960. So he said, you should see this book. And I'm like, why? What's in the book? He said, well, he was arrested for having sex with 10 men, and he was thrown in San Quentin. So we have evidence that this man maybe didn't call himself gay, but he certainly wasn't having sex with women. And yeah, so, even though the Historical Society had, because he was a PR person, he really just, he would charge people to come out and talk to him, and he played. And the Nat King Cole Nature Boy is written based on his life, and all these kind of crazy things. So the Historical Society said, yeah, we know a lot about him, but I guess we never really talked about him being gay. In the 50s, no one would have wanted to talk about him that way. So it's just helping to flush out things that, here's a person that moved and lived a kind of a gay life well before Stonewall, well before anything, and yet, if you don't really tell the stories, they're lost.
Yeah, that's I have a question about that, but we'll ask the one question that's in the Q&A first. Barbara asks if you would comment on the demographics of the LGBTQ plus community in the Palm Springs area. Is it older? Is it white? It's non-binary? Like, what's your?
Oh, well, it's pretty much all over the map. I think that the perception is that it's older white gay men, but if you look at the entire Coachella Valley, that's not necessarily true. Lesbians have not been as visible. However, the Dinah Shore tournament happened here for many, many years, and there was a big party similar to the white party called the Dinah. It's been going for 30 some years. And that's the largest, quote, lesbian party in the world. So, they bring in a lot of young people, whatever, older women who like to play golf too. So I think demographically, Palm Springs itself is probably skewed more towards 40 plus age group, but there are the LGBT community center here of the desert has been branching out too, and they have a I guess you would say a satellite office in the town of Coachella, which is not where Coachella, the music festival, is held, but that's in another town. But irritates Coachella, I think, but whatever. Coachella is actually a town, and it's pretty much a working class community. So people of Native American descent or Hispanic descent, many agricultural workers live there because the Eastern Valley is very agricultural. And so they've opened up a satellite office because if you look at the gay and straight alliances, there are lots and lots of young people who are in high school, middle school, and who are in college who identify now as gay, lesbian, or transgender. And so, they're growing up here, and they live in an environment where it's pretty easy to be gay, because being gay is not as difficult. Obviously, there's still gay bashing takes place, but because of the work of the Gay and Straight Alliance, which is celebrating its 40th year here too, people began to try to deal with folks who are living here as well, because these are the people who keep our businesses going. They run the they work in the hotels and they work in the restaurants and they do all those kinds of things. So housing is an issue because now we don't, it's cheap. The average house in Palm Springs is getting close to $1 million. And so it's pretty difficult right in Palm Springs. Currently, they are building a LGBT assisted living facility, which is the first kind of in the country, big, huge one. I'm not sure how many people that's going to hold. I think 200 to 300, something like that.
Wow.
So I would say the demographics are pretty broad, but and financially it goes the gamut from people who really moved here because they had AIDS and needed healthcare, and so it seemed okay that they could live here. And the Desert AIDS Project and AIDS Assistance Program deal with people who might just be on Medicare or whatever.
Mhm.
And yet we also have, billionaires.
Right.
Yeah. As an example, the latest Walk of Stars recipient is David Lee. He's the producer of Frasier and blah, blah, blah. And, we're trying to restore our historic theater downtown, and he gave $5 million donation. Okay, well, he's probably, not harding for a place to live.
So we're almost at the top of the hour, but I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the kinds of items that are part of the archive. You mentioned to me they're like newspaper articles or ads or promotional or marketing materials, and I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, we basically would. So people have asked us a lot about what we would collect. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens here, somebody moves from Chicago or San Francisco or LA or whatever, and they move here and retire, and they want to give us, all their drummer magazines. Well, no, we're not collecting drummer magazines. They have to be things that are have some connection to the Coachella Valley in some way. So anything that you have or that individuals have that took place here, you got from here, we will take.
Mhm.
So it runs the gamut from bar pins to matchbook covers to posters to photographs. Michael Childers lives here, and he was a photographer, a pretty famous photographer of movie stars and celebrities and so forth and so on. And so, he has a collection of individuals who might have a vacation home or something that lived here who are gay and lesbian. So, his portraits of Lily Tomlin and Jane Wagner could be part of our collection. They have to do with people who lived here. And so, yes, Michael Feinstein performs here all the time. So it doesn't really matter. We are just trying to make sure that they have some connection, just like on the Walk of Stars, you have to have some connection to the local area. And so that's really what we are collecting, and it could be almost anything. One of our more unusual things, I think, is a huge watercolor portrait of a gentleman by the name of Bob Hoven, who was a businessman, and he started the local LGBT chamber, and he published a newspaper for many, many years. And he used one of the local bars as kind of his office. You know, he would just sit there all day and gather gossip and whatever. And he also had a drag troupe. And so the owner of the bar at that time, the manager of the bar at that time, is a very good watercolor portraitist. And so he painted portraits of these drag personas. And one is this guy, Bob Hoven. And this painting is probably 3 feet by 2.5 feet. Gorgeous painting, you know, framed painting. It hung in this bar for like 20 years, I guess. And finally, the new owners of the bar said, you know, we need to give this portrait to you. Nobody in our bar knows who this man is, why this portrait is here. This man has a star on the Walk of Stars. Why don't you take this portrait? And so we did. And so when we did that, then other people who said, oh, my painting was painted too. So, you know, I'll let you have my portrait. So we have a collection of those. They're not photos, but they are, you know, they're original paintings.
You should lead with that. That's a funny story. That's great.
So, you know, you don't really know what people are asking. So basically, you know, we have a collection policy that we use, and we would kind of look at that. But oftentimes people don't really know. They say, well, I have a box of things and I think this is what's in the box.
Yeah.
You take the box, you go through, you catalog it, either myself, the library, somebody catalogs that box. And if there are things in the box that have nothing to do with what fits our collection policy, if the person's alive, we go back and we say, we don't want these things. Do you want them back?
Right.
If they don't want them back, we throw them away or try to find another place for them if they're worth anything. If not, then we just give them back. And we then have a gift of deed that they have to, a legal document that they have to sign, and it catalogs every single thing that they've given to us with the stipulation that we can get rid of it if we don't want it anymore.
Sure.
And the reason for that is, as an example, I mentioned earlier in the talk that we were given a complete set of magazines that have been published here over 5 or 6 years. I don't remember. It's not published anymore. And originally the editor for last fall, had given us 3 issues that he had that we could put in. We really wanted the first one, and he had that. And so we put that in the collection. Well, subsequently, a gentleman gave us a complete set. And we now have, you know, duplicates of 3 issues. Well, we've decided that 2 of them are worth keeping, but 1 of them is not. We just don't need it. And so, you know, we'll get rid of it.
Yeah, deaccession. Yeah.
And, you know, that kind of thing, you determine what's the best quality, and then, you know, eventually those will be scanned so that, you know, people don't really have to get to the original document, but we would have the original document.
Right. So we're past the top of the hour by a couple minutes here. I'm going to read just a couple of the messages in the chat because I think they're really great, and then I'm going to wrap up.
Okay.
So one of the messages, Terry says, would love to see your exhibit tour the state. It would definitely generate donations, fiscal and archival. Just a thought there.
Okay. I guess we're open to
open to that invitation.
So the exhibition is traveling.
Oh,
it
great.
could travel. We will have it up in June at the main public library. And we also have tried to take it to some of the other gay and lesbian pride events, if possible. Unfortunately, it takes up a certain amount of space and has to be indoors. We can't set the exhibition up outside.
Yeah. Mike says, thanks for letting us into this exciting and most important project at the very beginning. And then someone also says, she's glad to see that this archive exists, having lived in places where I'm sure this history will be needing the same attention.
Yeah, I think that was our real intent. And part of our intent really has been to document, because as I said, there's lots of hearsay. So people have written all these books about Palm Springs and gay celebrities. And so if you, for instance, Tab Hunter, yes, we can document that he had a gay relationship. But Cary Grant, we really can't. So that's a little bit more nebulous. So we want to make sure that what we are doing provides individuals in the future, if they're going to write books or articles or whatever, that they could actually come back and say, oh, this is when that happened. You know, if they mention, oh, such and such a bar was firebombed, where did they get that information from? They should be able to find that information with us so that they know that this is when that vandalism happened. And there was a lot of that over the years, and be able to go back and see what the protests were about, having a parade on our main street, and you know, Palm Springs wasn't always welcoming. And so you want to make sure that people get the information as correct as possible.
I wasn't going to ask this question, but you made me ask it, and then I'll wrap up. So the question is about who is accessing the archive now. Are you getting requests from scholars who are doing research and that want to get in there, or how's that working so far?
Well, right now we have very few requests of people who are actually looking. We've gotten probably 3, but we expect so generally what we are planning to do, as I said, we're going to set up a website. We're going to try to scan the publication. We're going to start with the publication that we have the complete issues for.
Yeah.
And those would then be linked on our website so that people could just go in on their own and find them, which you couldn't do right now. So for instance, in the very first issue of that particular publication, there was an article about a woman by the name of Kellogg, who was a lesbian, who came here early in the turn of the 20th century, and sort of opened her own little private guest house for her fabulous lesbian friends. So there's this whole article about her, but right now that's not really very accessible, and people might have heard about her and so might want more information about her. But right now there would be things about her, I'm sure, on the internet, but this particular article wouldn't be available. And so what we're trying to do is, that's how we would do it. So I'm not sure that we would always get a request unless somebody actually says, oh, I really want to see such and such. But right now, most everything could be scannable, so we probably wouldn't, you know, there's no need for somebody to come in and say, oh, I need to see that poster. No, we'll just scan the poster and you can see the poster.
Right. Yeah. Great. Well, okay, now we're really past the top of the hour, 10 minutes after. So I'm going to wrap up here, David, by saying thank you so much for doing this. It's really been great working with you. And I've really enjoyed hearing all about the archive and the project and what you're doing. And I'm excited for the future for you.
And I don't know if any of your members are going to the archival conference that is here this weekend, but both Julie Warren, the other co-chair and co-founder with myself, will be presenting at that conference on Saturday. And we certainly would be around to talk to anyone who might be more interested.
Yeah, I think it's the California Archivists Conference.
Yes.
I think that's what it's called. So if you're going to that, David's going to be there with Julie, so you can find them and talk to them more about it.
And we're looking for part-time archivists.
So yeah, that's where you'll find them for sure. So thanks, David. This was really great. And thanks everyone out there in virtual world for attending this Book Club of California program. So,
Okay.
so as I said earlier, Rare Books Palm Springs is this weekend. That's where the conference is also happening. And Friday, May 20th from 6 to 8 p.m. is that fundraiser cocktail reception with proceeds of the $25 ticket going to various charities like the Book Club of California. So if you're around and want to take advantage of that, we would certainly love for you to do that. The book fair is also being held on Saturday, May 21st from 10 to 6. And that's the free admission. That's free admission day, but you have to reserve a ticket on Eventbrite. So to do that, you're going to want to go to rarebooksla.com. So RAREBOOKSLA.com. Maybe we'll see you, or you'll see other folks there at the Rare Books Palm Springs. You can join the book club for our next program. It's the 2022 Oscar Lewis Awards on Monday, May 23rd at 6 p.m. So it's a week from today. That's going to be a live and in-person program. So it'll be in person. We'll present it also on Zoom. This year's honorees are Charles Wollenberg, who's going to be recognized for his contributions to Western history, and Mary Risala Laird will be recognized for her contributions to the book arts. So you can register for that event and any book club event online at bccbooks.org/programs, or you can use the link that's in your kind of weekly email that you're getting from the Book Club of California. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, David. This was terrific. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Check out Rare Books Palm Springs if you can. Be well and take care of yourself. Good night, everyone.